chapters. Today's video is a book chat. Yay! A book chat. I read a book and we're going to talk about it. It's Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I'm so glad I read this book. I did not expect to love the story, to love the characters. I did not expect to have fun while reading this book. This is the part where I tell you what Pride and Prejudice is about, even though you're all familiar with it. Anyway, let's do this. Pride and Prejudice is about a rich guy meeting a country girl. This rich guy, Mr. Darcy, and the country girl is Lizzie Bennet or Elizabeth. Those two characters didn't have a good first impression with one another. Mr. Darcy came off as an arrogant, snobbish, yes, wealthy man. Everyone hated his presence because he was rude. And Mr. Darcy's first impression towards Lizzie was that she was just a normal, plain, unattractive country girl that came from a poor family. So he doesn't want to interact with her. Like, hell nah, I'm not gonna talk to that girl because she's so plain. We're not on the same level. And Lizzie heard that, and it was rude. It was an insulting thing to say. The first part, Mr. Darcy and Lizzie, they often clash. They tend to argue. It's either they argue or they don't talk. They ignore each other. But as the story goes on and they hang out more, Mr. Darcy realized that Lizzie's eyes were beautiful. They were sparkling, shining, and bam! Mr. Darcy fell in love with Lizzie. I mean, not immediately, but slowly he was falling for her, not because he finds her beautiful, not because he finds her physically attractive, but because he was attracted to her personality, her strong character, and it was just so sweet, like, dang! Sana all! But Lizzie, for her, Mr. Darcy was still this arrogant jerk guy. Pride and Prejudice is all about them getting to know one another and them getting past that bad first impression they have with each other. Anyway, okay, that's it for the non-spoiler section. See you guys on the spoiler section. In 3, 2, 1. Hey guys! Welcome back. Welcome to the spoiler section, where we talk about the things I love, the things that made me sad, that broke my heart in this book. Because yes, it's a romantic novel, but you know, a love story is not a love story without pain and rejection in it. And this book has lots of rejection. Lots of rejection. So the first thing that I love about this book was the conversation between Lizzie and Charlotte. Charlotte was Lizzie's best friend. So these two characters, they had this conversation about Jane and Mr. Bingley's relationship. And Charlotte was telling Lizzie to talk to Jane that she should be more expressive of her feelings toward Mr. Bingley. Because for Charlotte, the way she sees it is that Mr. Bingley was so open about his attraction towards Jane, but Jane was too reserved. She was shy, and it wasn't obvious that she also shares the same feelings toward Mr. Bingley. So she was telling Lizzie, hey, maybe you can talk to your sister and tell her be more expressive, because if not, it might stop him from forming a romantic relationship with her if she doesn't show that she was also attracted, that she also wants to be with Mr. Bingley. So perhaps, you know, talk to her to be more expressive. And Lizzie was like, hey, my sister shows her attraction towards Mr. Bingley. Like, it was obvious that Jane also likes him. And Charlotte is like, perhaps for you it was obvious because you are her sister, but for a stranger like Mr. Bingley, it might not be too obvious. And the second second topic that they talk about was about marriage and love. You see, Charlotte, she chose to marry Mr. Collins, even though Charlotte knows that she doesn't love him and he doesn't love her back. But because for Charlotte, it's not important if the guy doesn't love you. For Charlotte, what matters is that she gets married and she has a home to go to. And for Lizzie, it's different because Lizzie believes that marriage should be about love. It should not be about wealth. It should not be about the status of your husband. Let's go to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy. At first, I was just like everybody else and Lizzie. I hated him. Yes, he is arrogant. He can be rude and snobbish, but deep inside he was just a shy, socially awkward guy, and he's so cute, he is so loving, he is so caring, he is so protective of the people he cares about. Like, he's willing to be the bad guy, he's willing to do the dirty stuff just to protect the people he cares about, just to protect his friends, just to protect his family. Like, he's a great guy. When did I start falling in love with Mr. Darcy? I started falling in love with him when he noticed that Lizzie's eyes were sparkling. When he realized that, he slowly see how great of a person Lizzie is. The more he talks to her, the more he sees Lizzie, the more this attraction, this flame grows. It's not an instant love. It's not a love at first sight. What I found funny towards reading this book is that Mr. Darcy is shy. He doesn't know how to approach Lizzie. So what he did was he tends to go to gatherings where he knows Lizzie will be. Lizzie thinks that Mr. Darcy looks at her because he was judging her. In reality, Mr. Darcy was bewitched by her beauty, by her personality. Okay, let's stop for a minute about Mr. Darcy and talk about other characters. There's this scene where Lizzie rejected Mr. Collins' proposal. And Mrs. Bennet went to Mr. Bennet and asked him to talk to Lizzie to make her agree to Mr. Collins' marriage proposal. But what Mr. Bennet did was he made Lizzie choose between him and Mrs. Bennet. He told Lizzie that, okay, Lizzie, if you choose to marry Mr. Collins, your mother will accept you, will still see you as her daughter. But if you accept Mr. Collins' marriage proposal, you will lose me. Mr. Bennet chose Lizzie's happiness over, marriage, even though this marriage will save them, will save the fortune that he built. He still chose her happiness over money, and it was just so good. I love Mr. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet was I understand marriage was important. It's how you became successful back then. And I know it's her way of showing her love towards her daughters, but Mrs. Bennet was just so annoying. Jane and Mr. Bingley. Mr. Bingley, what he did was a jerk move. Like, he didn't even tell Jane that, I don't plan to go back to Netherfields to be with you. I hate how easily he left Jane. It was just I hate how weak his love for Jane is. So now let's go back to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy and Lizzie walking around outside Rosenberg. He was starting to ask Lizzie personal questions, and Lizzie was confused. She doesn't understand why Mr. Darcy kept on appearing whenever she was taking a walk. They kept on seeing each other, and Mr. Darcy kept on walking with her. That walking scene where they just talked, it was so romantic. It was so sweet of Mr. Darcy to finally slowly come out of his shell. But then the marriage proposal happened. This was the epic moment in the book. Mr. Darcy was like, hey, I love you. I've been in love with you and I've been hiding it for quite some time now and I can't hide it anymore. And I want you to be my wife. I want us to get married even though your family is poor. Boy, was I stressed when I read that scene. Like, no, Darcy, take it back, baby. That ain't good. You need to rethink your words. Lizzie was like, what the fuck, Darcy? You expect me to accept your marriage proposal after insulting me and my parents, my siblings, after insulting our whole family. You expect me to marry you after all the bad things you did with Mr. Wickham and after what you did to my sister's relationship. And because of that, you know, after all the hurtful things, Elizabeth said to Mr. Darcy, was just like, you know what? I said what I need to say. I love you, but you rejected me. Okay, I'll accept that. That's it. Goodbye. Of course, that ain't the end because Mr. Darcy wrote a very long letter explaining himself, revealing how terrible of a man Mr. Wickham is. Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth saw each other again after the rejection. Mr. Darcy was being so kind and welcoming, and she wasn't used to that kind of Mr. Darcy. And in Pemberley, she saw the real Mr. Darcy, the sweet, caring, protective older brother. Oh my gosh, he paid Wickham to marry Lydia in secret. And it was just so sweet because Mr. Darcy didn't want Lizzie to know what he did. Even though Lizzie said those harsh, mean stuff about him, his love didn't falter. He wasn't expecting anything. He said that all he wanted was Lizzie to be happy. Jane Austen did a great job making this character so imperfect but such a great character. If you still haven't read Pride and Prejudice, I highly recommend you read this book because yes, it is a classic book, but once you read this book, especially in audiobook, while reading and listening to the audiobook, that's what I did, and that's why I think I enjoyed it so much more rather than just reading the book, because I was also listening to someone telling me the story and it was just an amazing experience. If you're still intimidated with classic books, I highly recommend you to start off with Pride and Prejudice because it's such an easy story to get into. As the story goes on, you get to know more of these characters. You get to see them make mistakes. Those mistakes that they did, they were able to overcome those mistakes and become a better version of themselves. And it's just a great story. I just love how the characters develop. So far, this is the most authentic and well-developed love story that I've read. Even though it happened years ago, love before is still the same as now. It doesn't change. Love is love, and it's so wonderful how Jane Austen wrote it, how she described these two people falling in love slowly but surely. I just love it. Pride and Prejudice, I gave it 4.5 stars. I would have loved to see more romantic scenes between Mr. Darcy and Lizzie. So yeah, that's it for this book chat. I hope you enjoy having a chat with me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And yeah, so again, thank you for watching. See you on my next chapter. Bye!